Namaskar and, Namaskar and welcome to this exciting episode of Sattology, Debunking Mythology. As you all know, Sattology is a word which I coined in my first book, and it means I use the Sanskrit root word. Sat means truth, logos means a study or science. Sattology is study of truth, science of truth. It's a true antonym of mythology, which means a study of myth, fake, lie, imagination, or science of myth, lie, fake imagination, a lie, fake imagination. Now, this word was purposely coined to put all the gentiles, ethnics, and non religiously outside any of the Brahmic faiths, that their history is a fake, is a mythology. Started in 1638 and was documented well by 1838. So it took a lot of time. And today, the connotation means any ancient history is mythology, which is not true. In fact, they say that in Wikipedia, if you look at the religion of all the natives of South America, it comes out to be a mythology. So I have a very, very special person with us today. He's a director and is a department of Geopolitics and International Relations, Manipal University. Now, he's the vice chairman of Manipal Advanced Research Group. He was the first professor in Asia on geopolitics. And above all, he's a very famous commentator, strategic analyst and commentator in many Indian forums. And his predictions, his analysis are very sharp, to the point. So without delay, let us welcome Dr. Madhav Das Nalapat.
Thank you very much, Aditya. I think, there's a mutual admiration society of two people. And I'm not sure that number is very much more than the two of us. But thank you very much for that extremely generous introduction. Yes, you're perfectly right. Manipal University did appoint me as the country's, and I think quite possibly Asia's, first professor of geopolitics. Well, first, there was a very great scholar in the United States called George Stanton. I had the privilege of knowing him for many years, a wonderful human being. You have people like Andy Marshall there, who are again great scholars. George Stanton was a very, very great scholar. And George loved India. Both the Tannums loved India. They used to visit this country. But there was one problem that George constantly pointed out about India, which is, look, you guys don't have a strategic culture. I mean, forget about it, and only from a strategic culture, you can have a strategic plan. So he used to say that we are the one major country in the world. I mean, we were at that time, and we still are, although I think we are likely to become the most populous country in the world reasonably soon. I don't know if that's good or bad. But he used to say that you're the only major country I've seen that doesn't really have a strategy. And by strategy, what George defined was very clearly a set of, first of all, foundational principles. Secondly, the strategies and tactics flowing from those principles. And, we used to have very many conversations, sometimes in India, sometimes in Washington, sometimes in some other US cities. And he used to say, look, when I study India a great deal of the time, because I do believe, and I think he was absolutely right on that. I frankly agreed with him, and I had that same belief for some time, that look, it's very essential for the United States and India, for our common futures, to work very closely together. And that's why I'm taking all this time to study India. And he used to say that what you call strategy, you means India. Well, George was not the United States. I'm certainly not India, and very definitely not the Indian government, of which I've had the honor never to be a part. But I'd like to say that what you call strategy is actually a bunch of tactics that evolves as situations change. You have a new set of tactics, and that set of tactics after some time gets bunched together and you call it a strategy. But it's essentially short-term reactions ignoring, if I may say so, long-term potential, long-term opportunities, long-term threats. Well, I mean, he was preaching to the converted. I would not say that we never had a strategic culture. I think we certainly had a strategic culture, and we had it all through. Whether it is in the early period, the Vedic period, there was a strategic culture for quite some time until Sanatana Dharma, regrettably, was infused with elements such as, for example, caste by birth, which frankly is a complete scientific absurdity, and various other, if I may say so, the various other changes in the original doctrine of Sanatana Dharma. But during the time when there was Sanatana Dharma as such, and frankly, let me be frank, Aditya, a lot of people who consider themselves to be, hardcore Sanatanis or hardcore Hindus, the word Hindu is often used as a substitute for the word Sanatani, but Sanatani, I think, is a little more universal, and anyone can be a Sanatani, no matter which faith you belong to, no matter that you don't belong to any faith at all. Why? Because what does it say? As you know, Aditya, very well, it means that every path leads to the same goal. And that goal is the absorption of each of us in the universe. Of course, Sanatanis believe that the universe was created by a sound. And the sound, of course, is the sound of Om. And, a very deep Om. And from there, the universe was created. Well, I'm still waiting for science to tell me a different theory or otherwise. But I'd only like to say that there was a strategic culture at that time. Of course, after which the country, in a sense, descended into various clans and chaos and distinctions. And I really find it very difficult to understand people who say X is different from Y, Y is different from Z, because I've always believed in the reality that human society is horizontal and not vertical. I mean, this is not something that I'm saying for the first time, I must confess. What do I mean by that? It means that we are different from each other, very definitely. We may be different skin deep. We may be different in terms of going into deeper differences than that. We may be different in terms of mindsets. We may be different in terms of reactions and upbringing. But essentially, we are all, as Friedman once said, the world is flat. Human beings come from a very flat trajectory. We're all the same. A vertical view of society, such as, for example, the system of caste by birth, assumes that human beings are graded into higher, lower, middle, under middle, lower middle, lowest middle, lowest middle, things like that. Frankly, it makes no sense for the simple reason that any individual, anywhere in the world, if that individual has a particular set of experiences, has a particular set of stimuli, let's put it that way, well, that individual will do as well or as badly as any other individual. Now, I mean, this has been demonstrated to me, at least personally, many, many times. One time was when a friend of mine in Mumbai, he frankly is a very retiring person. He doesn't like his name to be talked about. So once or twice when I used his name, he called me. He's not very happy. I'm not going to use his name. Let's just say that he's a person who has made an enormous amount of money in the financial markets. And he has spent a lot of that money in ensuring that the tribal schools where young tribal students study, they had complete access to broadband internet. They were given laptops, and subsequently they were given handheld instruments. They were given complete access, and they were given a boot camp training in how to use that access. Well, there were some sociologists from different countries There were some sociologists from India who were interested in that. Obviously, I was interested in that as a friend of this gentleman. And you know, in just about a year's time, there was an immense change, if I may say so, in the if I may say so, the universe of attention of these students. Many of them were conversing with people from all parts of the world. They were conversing with people. I mean, when I came, the first student was conversing with somebody in Brazil. So, I mean, they know Portuguese language. Were they conversing in sign language? But it turned out that they could just about make each other understood through what we call Indian English, and the Brazilians define as English in their country. They were getting along fairly well, like a house on fire. These two, young boys. Well, some of them were using social media to, I'm not going to use slang, but let's say meet interesting people, and then they were developing relationships virtually with these interesting people. In other words, they were behaving the way people in Mumbai, for example, or Delhi, or New York, or London, of a certain class. Let's use that Marxian term, class. Karl Marx was wrong in many things, but he did classify things into different classes. And so let me again go back into that class. People of a certain class. Now, these young boys were definitely not 1 millionth as wealthy as these boys were, some of whom I knew in Mumbai, etc., who were doing all these things, who have been doing all these things. But they developed and they started doing all these things. Their universe expanded. And I'm happy to say, subsequently, in some part because of the help, in large, entirely, that was the catalyst, and the help given by the gentleman who put them online. Many of them found out opportunities online that they would not find out elsewhere, or they could not have found out except online. When this is about 20 years ago that I'm talking about, that this thing really started, this interest started coming about different kind of things. And at that point in time, I can tell you, there was really no social media. There was online. There were conversations or something, as I remember. There were some, I think, possibly some chat rooms or something. But it was not the kind of fast forward kind of thing that we have now. But I think this is the later period of the 90s, the beginning of the 21st century. And at that point in time, frankly, you had chat rooms, you had all kinds of things, which a lot of them I discovered with these young boys. But, the reaction of these sociologists, and I apologize if anybody is studying sociology here or is a sociologist, I'm not talking about all sociologists. I'm talking about the three sociologists, including the Indian sociologists who came with me, all of whom started berating my friend and saying, "What have you done?" So I was delighted. He was delighted. And they said, "What have you done? What have you done? What have you done to these kids?" So frankly, I hadn't an idea, what he had done, except that he had empowered them. But they believed that, no, these kids should be left as they were in their, they use some words which, frankly, pristine or something, I don't know what, but they should be frozen in that. They shouldn't go further. And in fact, one of the kids was basically singing a Bollywood song, and a particular sociologist from a European country said, "What on earth is going on? He's singing a song from Bollywood. He should be singing a song from his own dialect." Look, a lot of people in India who don't have Hindi as a dialect, or Hindustani, which is the language of Bollywood. Bollywood language is certainly not Shuddh Hindi as is defined. It's Hindustani, and thank God for that. I mean, I didn't see any problem in that. And the third sociologist also was extremely upset that we had, in a sense, interfered with the quote unquote natural development of these youngsters, and their lives would be completely ruined as a consequence. Well, about 2 decades have gone by since that time. This was way back. I mean, it happened way back. So my memory, frankly, in these days of digital science, I don't think anything that is more than 5 years old, that this has much value, because the world is changing at least every 5 years, and it used to change once every 50 years, once every maybe 150 years. It's now changing every 5 years. It was a long, but the reality of situation is at least 1/3 of these students have become well paid professionals in urban settings. I didn't think of calling these three sociologists who were there. One of them, unfortunately, was no longer among the living, because I'm sure they would have got very upset about that they were not still in their villages, that they were not still indulging in going into a very, if I may say so, a very, unrewarding in terms of, output kind of agriculture, and a very difficult kind of life in terms of physical effort. So at least 1/3 were there. About 2/3, unfortunately, track had been lost of them. But of that 1/3, several were having fairly good incomes. I'm sure the other 2/3 also would have definitely been better off. The fact that they lost contact is one thing, but I don't believe that they lost contact because they suddenly, dropped off the scale in terms of their capabilities or their empowerment or their whatever. But I'm only pointing out the point that, look, human beings are the same. Sanatana Dharma recognizes that basic reality. And today, I'm happy to say, we are living in a world in which people from all religions, of all races, of all countries, a large and increasing proportion of them accept the truth of this, this horizontal view on society. And lest you believe, I did write a paper on this for Bar-Ilan University in Israel way back. Again, I think going back to that particular period. But the reality is, it is a friend of mine who basically drew attention to this concept to me. And that gentleman was named Kanshi Ram. He was the founder of something called DS4, which subsequently became the Bahujan Samaj Party. And he was a very good friend of Lakshmi and myself. He used to come and stay at home with us when he used to be around in Mumbai. And he used to stay at home with us sometimes when we were in Delhi. Of course, subsequently, his party became pretty influential. And he didn't stay with us anymore, but he remained a friend all his life. He showed me a fountain pen of his. I don't have a fountain pen at this moment. And he said, look, I'm holding this pen up vertically. Now I'm holding it horizontally. This is society, the horizontal fountain pen. This is not society, the vertical fountain pen. Let me tell you, Aditya, that lesson has been burned into me better than anything I could ever read or write or have listened to has. Kanshi Ram's fountain pen, which he had with him and which he showed me. So what I want to say is, we had a doctrine at that point in time, Sanatana Dharma period, when society became from horizontal to vertical. When I say horizontal, I don't mean that everybody has the same income or even the same opportunities or the same chances, but they have a chance at those chances. They have an opportunity at those opportunities. And they are not disqualified almost by birth itself, or almost by the birth of circumstances, for example, from those opportunities. And unless systems create opportunities for all of the population of a country, if you have systems that create opportunities only for a limited number of people, and a different number of opportunities for other people, whether it's the American dream or the India dream or the China dream or whatever dream you call it. If that dream is not potentially in the grasp of any citizen of these three largest geopolitical entities in the world, well, that's not a dream. It's a societal nightmare. And I can tell you that whether it is, there are phases in US history, in India's history, in British history, in definitely in China's history, in which, let's be honest, a few people have gained enormously, a lot of people have not gained. The fact is, the middle class should basically more and more go into the upper class. The so-called lower class should go and more go into the middle class, and there should be a rising of society. I mean, it's not a trickle-down theory of money. It's a trickle-up theory of population that I'm talking about. And if that trickle-up is not there, and if you see barriers, whether it's a glass barrier that is frankly there between men and women in many parts of the world, let's be honest, including in some of the quote-unquote most civilized countries of the world, whether it be barriers based on race. And I'd like to say, I think some countries in Europe, these barriers are there. United States is not there in some places. It is there in some places. And let's be honest, in India, the reality is that we have our own barriers. It may not be caused by race. It may be caused by even more ephemeral characteristics, such as quote unquote caste by birth. Because Aditya, very frankly, I go across the country, I meet a lot of people. You ask me to, what is the caste of that person or the caste of that person? And you say that, look, if you don't tell me the caste, I'm going to do something terrible. The reality is, even to save my life, I don't really know, what the caste of people are. I mean, back in the even 30 years back, I've written this kind of thing, more than 30 in the Mathrubhumi, for example, in Kerala. I talked about two political leaders. One was Kanchira, and the other was a very prominent Marxist leader of Kerala. I'm not going to name him. And I said, look at these two people. And look at, I was arguing with somebody who was talking about caste, that people of a particular caste have a particular physical characteristic, they have a particular complexion, and they are a particular stage, height, weight, whatever, whatever. I said, look at these two. And one of them belongs to the highest caste in Kerala. According to your definition of caste. My definition is, it's something that is acquired over the course of one's life, and it may change also over time. But your definition is that you're born with it. And look at the caste of my very good friend. And you tell me, you're talking about these characteristics. Whose physical structure is what you define as very high caste? Whose superficial skin, whatever, is defined by you as high caste? You please tell me. Because frankly, if using your categorization, I'd put this Kerala leader in a different category altogether based on what you're saying. And yet he's not in that category. And I'm saying this to you to tell you that I'm sorry, I don't buy your arguments. I think they are, I use some polite words, but frankly, I lost respect for that person after that. And after that, very, very frankly, I ceased to take him seriously when he was arguing. He was a so-called a scholar. I mean, we are all people who act, who say we know this and we know that. We do know something, we don't know something. But frankly, Aditya, what I'm trying to point out is that is a healthy society. And the core of a strategy has got to be to build a healthy society. You can play all the whatever Chanakya has taught, whatever Talleyrand or any of the or the so-called Bismarck or any of the statesmen in Europe have taught. You can do, whatever, has been taught by Machiavelli. It's of no value whatsoever. Your society is not safe unless your society has a population up system that involves people coming up, finding opportunities and coming up. And an important role in that is the creation of opportunities. Aditya, I have frankly, very well that, I'm not a particular fan of the Democratic Party or the Republicans for that matter. I particularly dislike Bill Clinton because the man worked night and day to give China a nuclear monopoly by removing India from that list. I compared it in the Times of India column to the thumb of Ekalavya. You remember, Ekalavya was a young lad who learned archery by watching from a hilltop the great archer Dronacharya teaching his royal students. And he challenged them to a match and he won. And of course, Dronacharya insisted that he cut his his thumb off. I said, what Clinton is trying to do, India is a low caste country. We really don't belong in the way the United States does and the way China does or Russia does. We don't really belong in that high caste group. So cut your thumb off, India. That's what Clinton's trying to do. Well, Ekalavya made the mistake of cutting his thumb off. Frankly, and I think it was a mistake for him to do that, but it just showed the grip of that kind of society in India at that point in time. I think it was unfortunate, but certainly I said India should never cut its nuclear thumb for the simple reason we are facing countries that we cannot predict. Well, Clinton certainly, could predict China. He could predict that by the first 10 years of the 21st century, for example, China will become at least a Singapore. Not a fully democratic country. A democratic country, but a democratic country with a single party, whatever, but a Singapore. Certainly not remain what it was or go, but I'm afraid today it's 2021. And I don't know, Mr. Clinton believes that that particular point of view on China. He gave China access to WTO, and most wonderfully, he gave access, complete and free access to the world, to whatever American technology had to offer. And of course, the Chinese under Deng Xiaoping were pretty smart. They opened their door. Some of us in India are worried, will Amazon come? Will Amazon eat us up? Will somebody else come? Will somebody else come and eat our lunch? Well, look, in 1980, when Deng Xiaoping opened China, I think 79 or 80 or 81, look, these years are different because definitions of opening up differ. So in my definition, it's around 81 that China really opened up. They were a very weak country. Believe it or not, our economy was probably larger than their economy. And they had nothing. Secondly, they had fought the US in the Korean War. They had definitely, given help to Vietnam in the Vietnamese War. And of course, after some time, Nixon and Mao worked together. Kissinger and future Chinese leaders worked together against the Soviet Union. That's a very smart move on the part of both the US and China at that point in time. There's no doubt about it. But the reality of the situation is the US and China were enemies. They were enemies ideologically. They had been enemies in the field of battle. They had been enemies in so many fields. And yet you open out the treasures of your knowledge, of your system to them, and you believe them and you trust them. And why I'm saying this, Aditya, is that, I think it's not only in the United States, quite frankly. Our country is also, my country is very much, prone to some of these flights of fancy about countries that we should watch out for, but countries that we don't really believe are as bad as what they seem. Well, for example, the gain of function research that's been going on at Wuhan. I mean, it's slowly now coming out into the open air that that particular virus may have accidentally been leaked. I don't think it was deliberately leaked. What was deliberate was the thousands of flights that left Wuhan, that left Hubei province to different parts of the world, carrying that virus with it. That was definitely deliberate. It may not have been Xi Jinping himself. It's quite possible Xi Jinping is a saintly man. He doesn't want to cause anything negative to anybody in humanity. It may have been some, provincial secretary, or maybe some mayor of a town. Maybe I'm just arguing hypothetically, but that particular decision made this a pandemic, and unfortunately for WHO, with all the money that the United States spent on it, as the previous president pointed out, $500 million as against a few $1 million spent by China, with all its research, its access, its facilities, its talent, the poor WHO could not come up with any conclusion, even after 13 months after this particular thing about the virus. The Taiwanese, with much less resources, they came up with a conclusion early on. If I'm, again, frankly, in these days of Google, I really don't need to be too precise about that. And I think it was December 2019, or or possibly January, most likely December, that the Taiwanese pointed out that this horrible virus is there, and watch out, it's a global threat. Flights were merrily taking off from Wuhan during that period. Now we know it was there as early possibly as September. Well, that was certainly pre-planned, but from 2014 to 2019, a lot of that research was funded by the United States. And now, and not only United States, the United States will be happy to know several of its European partners also gave funding and various help to the Wuhan Institute of Virology. It's not the only institution of higher learning in China that has received generous funding from US taxpayers. Taxpayer-funded universities have been similarly generous, even more generous, if I may say so. The Chinese send students there, they pay good fees, and in exchange, all the expensive research that is done by these universities flows out to China. Well, that's happening in a very big way. And it's happening in a lot more places, I can tell you, than the Wuhan Institute of Virology. There are at least, 160 institutes which are minimally dual use. Minimally means even a person of minimal common sense will understand that they are dual use. Anybody who minimally knows China, I would like to admit at this point, I like the Chinese people. I have gone several times to China. I enjoy my visits to China. I have immense respect for the Communist Party of China. I don't agree with their objectives. I don't agree with their methodologies. But I'd like to say, as opponents, which is what they are, of the United States and India, these are formidable opponents and we can't underestimate them. But I'd like to point out that anybody who's gone there even once or twice will know that there is a wall. It's not a bamboo curtain. It's not even an iron curtain. It's a much stronger curtain than that, if I may say so, between civil and military applications. One thing is certain, every laboratory, every university, and now under Xi Jinping, every Chinese company or any company which has got a heavy investment from China, which includes a lot of tech startups from India, United States, Europe, you name it, across the world. There is a civil component which is revealed to the rest of the world, and a military component which is revealed only to a certain number of people, all of whom will be Chinese citizens. I'm not finding fault with them on that. There are occasions in which I have come into the United States and I have been in conferences with friends, and occasionally they have recessed and they've said, sorry, this is no foreigner allowed. So I was usually the only quote unquote foreigner in some of these meetings. So I used to leave the room They would finish their discussion and then I would be invited back. That's fine. That's okay. I am an Indian citizen. I am loyal to my passport. I am certainly not loyal to any other passport, neither the United States, nor China, nor any other country. But that's fine. But I'm surprised that all this money was spent in the belief that all the technology that has been developed there will flow without any kind of separation or dilution to the United States, which the Chinese have long regarded as an enemy country. The Chinese definition of war is not the definition of war which is of the European powers and which we in India have adopted, which is, a lot of, what do I say, bang, bang, bullets, bombs, artillery, whatever. Soldiers, naval forces, air forces, now space forces. No, it's not that. It means dominating the enemy, capturing the mind, capturing maybe the health, capturing the agriculture, capturing the industry, a very comprehensive view of warfare, which is what their definition has been of warfare for approximately 2,600 years that I have counted. And it's a mystery to me that 2,600 years is not enough for anybody to not understand that the Chinese definition of warfare is not the definition of warfare in some other countries, unless some of the policymakers in those countries are people who believe that, navel gazing. So you basically concept gazing. The only concepts that are valid are concepts that you yourself believe in and that apply to you. And any other concept, frankly, can't be a concept by definition. I'm sorry, other countries have concepts. And if I may say so, whether it's China, whether it's India, other countries, there are countries with long traditions of civilization. And the Chinese, under Hu Jintao, rediscovered that tradition of civilizations. Frankly, Mao Zedong took a hatchet to that particular thing. And Jiang Zemin had a fusion civilization, a fusing of West and Chinese, so that when you watch a Chinese opera during Jiang's time, I mean, for some people it was painful, for others it was comic, but for Jiang it was showing the fusion of the United States and China, the G2, which I think was his ambition, that China is going to reach the G2. Well, a bit later on, they had a slightly different ambition. Why G2? For thousands of years, we have been G1. And the next guy, the G2 guy, is way, way below us. Why don't we go back to those thousands of years? And it started during Hu Jintao, when a conscious effort was made essentially to become a high-tech nation. The technology that used to go to China has always stayed in China, but this time they were more intensively researched, more intensively studied, and under Xi Jinping, that particular process has gone on steroids. What Xi Jinping has done is basically the nationalist ideology of Mao. And if I may say so, the ideology of being a techno superpower of Hu Jintao. He has gone beyond Mao, beyond Hu Jintao, and put these things on steroids, and that's what he is now engaged in. For example, metadata. You have a lot of metadata floating out there, and it's very interesting to see that in India, for example, when the government of India went in for the apps ban, the loudest complaints came from some of these American companies, the high-tech companies. And when you look at some of these, companies, and you look at some of these handles that they've got, the platforms they've got, anything that is critical of, let us say, of China, or critical, let us say, of Wahhabism. And I distinguish Wahhabism from Islam. My mother was Muslim. I'm proud of that. She converted to religion she believed in. I'm proud of that. And I would like to say, as a Sanatani, I don't see any difference between my mother as a Hindu and my mother as a Muslim. She was my mother, and she was the same person. But I'd like to say that, when you go into all that kind of action, when you go into all that kind of analysis and assessment, Well, then, the reality is that what is being happening in China today is fairly obvious to anybody who understands the psyche of a people by more than merely understanding the language, by understanding the food, by being able to speak and write the language fluently. I mean, cooking the food fluently, mixing and mingling fluently. And may I point out that I've seen across the world Han Chinese, I've seen Uyghur, I've seen Tibetan. I find usually, and I mean, it's a very, very small sample I was drawing on, it's not scientific at all. The Tibetan people who have come in, with Chinese passports, who are Tibetan, who have come in with Chinese passports, who are from a different nationality, to some extent, who believe that they're Mongolian, who believe that they're Xinjiang, they come from Xinjiang, they are Uyghurs. They generally don't change their names and put in different kind of names. The Han people do that beautifully. And I'd like to say I admire and respect them for that. The fact is that they can blend beautifully into cultures. And that is one reason why they have the potential to be so successful. So many Han across the world have a Western name. Now, I know friends of mine who are Han Chinese, who have adopted, and who are citizens of the People's Republic, by the way, who have adopted Indian names. And, and now I think they find that Indian names are pretty, if I may say so, cool across the world. So some of them are using the Indian names even abroad. They don't suddenly switch to, and of course they use Anglo-Saxon names. They don't switch to a German name in Germany or a French name in France. Anglo-Saxon names, they believe, is enough for the entire Western world. But an Indian name today, fortunately, in these less, if I may say so, prejudiced world, it's quote unquote cool. So many of them are doing that. So let me only say, they're a wonderful people, an extremely talented people, and now they have a leader who's trying to harness that talent, who's trying to also harness that natural desire, that natural belief, which was there even in Chairman Mao, that they are definitely, I wouldn't use terms from the past, terms from the 1930s. That's too crude. For example, the Han are not really an ethnic community. It's more of a cultural community rather than ethnic. It's an assimilated community in a way that in Germany, for example, that psychotic individual, I don't even want to repeat his name, who eliminated some of the most talented people on earth for reasons of psychosis, mass psychosis that he fed to millions of his citizens. Well, he never thought of that kind of assimilation. When the reality is that assimilation has frankly made the Han much stronger. So it's not a European kind of experience at all. But there is a real danger that the world is facing. And that is that an immovable object is meeting an irresistible force. What is immovable, hopefully, is the primacy of, I wouldn't call it the free world, because no country is truly free and no country is fully in chains. I mean, in China, for example, women have got freedom that they didn't have in the past. In some, in parts of the various democracies in the West and in the East, there are freedoms which some elements of society do not have, which are, taken as everyday life by other sections of society. So I'm not going to use words like the freedom or something, but certainly there is a clear face-off between the United States and countries that gravitate to the United States, and China and countries that gravitate to China. In the case of India, the people of India made their choice long back. And I'm again talking 30, 40, 50 years ago. Given my age, I'm not going to ever mention it, but I think, these are not impossible periods for me. 50, 60 years is not impossible. I won't go further than that. But the reality of the situation is, very, very frankly, that, that this is the world in which we are facing. And that primacy, the primacy of 1945, the primacy over authoritarian, evil that was established in 1945 and which the Soviet Union tried to channel. I'm not saying that the Soviet Empire was an evil empire. I don't go for that epithet. It sounds more like a Hollywood thing. I would expect somebody who has got trained in Hollywood to use that kind of epithet. But the reality is the Soviet system is definitely more constricting than the US system. I used to come to the US during the horrible days when Bill Clinton was in charge, and he used to try very hard to throw India out of Kashmir. He used to try very, very hard to remove nuclear weapons from India, basically confine India to a very small box. Well, I didn't get very much traction in the Clinton White House. I had one or two meetings in EOB. I had some reasonably, I would say, fortunately, medium level. I won't say low level, but medium level meetings in state, but that's about it. But look, I had some great meetings in DC. I had some great meetings in New York, in other parts of the United States, from people who were not, let us say, part of the Clinton this thing, people who were Republicans, for example. And I know this is a bad word, neocons. The neocons at that point in time had nowhere to go. Like me, they were wandering around looking for somebody who would spend 1 hour with them to talk to. And in both of us, we were mutually in that situation. So we used to talk to each other quite a lot. But it's not only a neocons. I would like to say that my love for the Jewish people, frankly, developed during that time because, when I was arguing that India and the United States are essential partners, arguing from a textbook that George Stanham, for example, has read, that I believed in right from the 1980s onwards, I found very few people are taking me seriously. And if I may say so, a certain section of society, let's say of European origin, they were very polite, most of them, because when they knew that I knew more than a few words of English, I'd like to make the point that, we talk of racism in the US. I've been to Alabama, I've been to Tennessee, I've been to Georgia during the periods that's the early 90s when situation was a little different from what it is now, a little different since Lyndon Johnson's had not yet had the impact, and certainly there was no Barack Obama in that particular time. But when they used to talk to me and they found that I knew 3 or 4 words of English, I could string 1 or 2 sentences together. Quite frankly, I tell you, their approach, I would say, was not in any sense, I did not really get a sense I was being actively discriminated against. I don't think so. So I think it's a little more than race. It's something to do with opportunity. And that's where, for example, I'm glad Joe Biden is going in for these massive schemes of $2 trillion. I would like to say what I call DINOs, Democrats in name only. Please don't sabotage that, because that money will rescue the United States from possible big trouble when you're going to confront in much greater way an implacable, irresistible enemy. Those are absolutely essential. Lyndon Johnson was essential. The Civil Rights Act was absolutely essential. Barack Obama was essential in showing people that anybody can make it in the United States. Well, in India, actually, we know that because, for example, a lot of these tech companies that are frankly not very India friendly, that are basically kissing the hem of the Chinese state and kissing the ring of the Chinese leadership, a lot of them are headed by Indians. So the ceiling that is there in Europe, ceiling that is there even in the United Kingdom, which is relatively a much higher ceiling, is very much higher in the US. In fact, I hardly saw it in the corporate world. And in the governance world also, frankly, I hardly saw it. That's why I'm optimistic about the future of racial, what do I say, racial relations in the United States, because fundamentally, I think American people, like Indian people, believe in what I've defined as a horizontal society. The majority of us believe we are human beings. The majority, overwhelming majority of people in Europe believe the same. The overwhelming people in Africa now, as they believe the same. All across the world, we are seeing a growing perception of the horizontal society. What I want to say before I open to questions, we are now, as if I may say so, I remember some words of Lincoln's Gettysburg Address. Well, we are now engaged in a war. I called it Cold War 2.0. Secretary of State Blinken, doesn't seem to agree. At least he's publicly said so. As far as Joe Biden is concerned, I think Joe Biden is getting several reality checks. One of them came very recently with this fighting in Gaza. Joe Biden treated Egypt under General Sisi as a pariah, as almost a pariah government. And Joe Biden suddenly had to realize that it was General Sisi who was very instrumental in getting this ceasefire organized. And thank God for that. I have long argued that from the Palestinian side, I'm proud to say that my country, from the 1950s, has recognized Palestine as a state. From the 1950s, we have a Palestine embassy and an ambassador of Palestine in India. And when Mahmoud Abbas came to India, Prime Minister Narendra Modi gave him the full panoply of a head of state. Recently in Australia, a few days ago, there was the premier of a province from the Solomon Islands. That particular premier has now landed in Taiwan, where he was received as the premier of an important province. In Australia, my information is just treated like you and I would be treated. I think the Australian bureaucracy should not have a very condescending attitude towards the South Sea Islands, because if they do that, you're playing into the hands of China. I'm a bit surprised to learn, and I hope I'm wrong, that the premier of the state of Malacca, a very strong supporter of democracy, a person who fought against the Solomon Island decision of the central government to say that we are shifting from Taiwan to the United States, to China. Well, that person, when he landed in Australia, was kept in quarantine for several weeks. And from what I understand, the privileges that should go to the governor of a province, let's say in China, the governor of a state in India, the governor of a state in the United States, or, let us say the head of the government, the devolved government of Scotland, would have got in Australia, was simply not given to him. If that is true, I would like to request my Australian friends, please remember a guy called Kanchiram. Please remember that if you're talking in terms of going after China, and I think this particular government under Scott Morrison has done a lot for that, please remember this kind of move is only helping China. I mean, I don't want to go into little more contentious issues of certain, sanctions on certain countries and certain, if I may say so, avoidance of contact with certain countries, and how this is playing to the communist Chinese playbook, because I don't want to make this, frankly, a discussion on US foreign policy or Indian foreign policy. The reality is we are in a war for supremacy of systems. The United States, mainly because of the errors of the Soviet Union, let me tell you, right from the time of Brezhnev, Khrushchev, for example, yes, Khrushchev, he went and released all the information about Stalin. That is a very good thing to do. I remember back when I was, in college, and I read the translation. I think it was by Stroke Talbot of Khrushchev's memoirs, and there was a lot about, and there was a tremendous amount of that, and I found that very, very helpful. But the reality is that fear, respect, and affection are the three drivers of support for any regime. any ideology, any regime, any system of governance. Well, I don't think there was much love for governance, for the governance system of the Soviet Union. From the time of Stalin, very frankly, it's very difficult to feel love for somebody who goes after people and kills them left, right, and center with the whole of the system. But when Khrushchev revealed Stalin's particular, the Stalin's secrets, when his secret speech, it finally seeped into Soviet society, and the respect of those who read the speech, that is the apparatchiks of the Soviet Union, of the Communist Party of Soviet Union itself, they lost respect for their own party. Xi Jinping is a much smarter guy than Khrushchev. That's why he is presenting Mao Zedong as a great hero. Now, Mao Zedong, did something for which in China, which did not happen, for example, in India. In India, when we got our freedom, about 40% of the country was, British India. You look at British India and you look at all the different territories that were run from Delhi, and you look at what territories that were run from Delhi in 1947, roughly 40% were removed, depending on your definition. I have my definition, that's why I'm using the 40%. But look, the Chinese state run from Beijing doubled in size under Mao, under the Communist Party of China. Xinjiang was taken over in the 1940s, before 1949. Tibet was taken over in the 1950s. And there was a red carpet for the takeover of Tibet from a lot of countries. I'm not going to name those countries, it's embarrassing. There were a lot of countries that gave a red carpet. Well, similarly, there's been a red carpet for a lot of the technologies that are being used today in China to develop artificial intelligence, to develop critical technologies. And the point of the matter is today, even if everybody in China is a saint, surely anybody can understand the deadly impact of bio warfare, potential bio warfare. Of course, I would like to add that I'm very sure the Chinese state would never have done that intent. Of course, some low-level official in the civil aviation ministry in the city of Wuhan may have done that. I'm willing to say that or so, whatever. But anybody who's even in high school will now understand across the world the potential of bioterror, the cost effectiveness of bioterror. And China, don't forget, is now a great friend of something which I have named the Wahhabi International. I distinguish Wahhabis from Muslims. Muslims are not Wahhabi. Wahhabis are, a separate kind of categorization altogether. But you have now President Erdogan. NATO hasn't yet found the XXXX to remove him from NATO. Neither the United States nor the Atlantic Alliance has found the XXXX to basically call him out. He has become a complete Wahhabi, and he's spreading this kind of thing all over the world. The same with the Pakistan military, which runs Pakistan. And is the United States calling out Pakistan? No, I'm sorry, it doesn't. Well, you can't, the United States, the only access through Afghanistan is through Pakistan. The only other access which India is building is through Iran. And under Trump, pressure was put on India to stop buying Iranian oil. And as a consequence today, we are in grave danger of losing those road and rail links to Afghanistan and Central Asia that pass from Iran. If I had to have any say in the matter, which fortunately or unfortunately I don't, I would have said nothing doing. You talk to Donald Trump and tell him, sorry, buddy, this is a very important country from our point of view, and we can't afford to get them angry. And frankly, not buying their oil at a time of hardship will only open the door to China, which is what has happened. Iran is rapidly on the way to joining Pakistan and other countries as part of the Sino-Russian alliance. So we have the US, India, Australia, Japan, the Quad, various other countries alliance. You have the Sino-Russian alliance. The difference is the Sino-Russian alliance has a clear strategy. They have tactics designed to meet that strategy. They have very clear knowledge of the enemy. Take the case of, the minds of citizens. I have argued for some time that social media sites are essentially being utilized to ensure that the fringes of society, in the fringes of opinion, the right fringe and the left fringe, let's not say one is more saintly than the other, the right fringe and the left fringe are put on steroids. And the middle, the moderate middle, which should be the overwhelming majority, gets squeezed more and more. So eventually the fringe, the two fringes, come close to the majority of a society. That is very much a danger point in any society. That's been happening in countries across the world. I'm not going to name them. I think those who are living in those countries know exactly what I'm speaking about. It's a very grave danger. And if it's very good, for example, Democrats to say, oh, it's all the Republicans' fault. Republicans say, oh, it's all, the Democrats' fault. It's all good to say, oh, that's all Modi's fault. It's all good to say for those who support Modi that, no, it's all the anti-Modi, it's all the anti-Modi group's fault. I'm sorry. It is maybe the fault or whatever of all these groups. There are also other forces of work. And let me remind you, about 70% of online gaming. I'm sorry, I can't describe online games more because even in an arcade, I've gone to arcades with some nephews of mine. I've never, or my cousins when they were younger and I was younger, but I don't know what gaming is all about. But I'm now it's online gaming. It presumably is different from an arcade. Of course, it's different from an arcade. 70% and more is controlled by Chinese entities. About 70% is the same proportion of Indian startups, high-tech startups, that are now got some or a bulk of Chinese funding. In the last 1 month, I came across 3 brilliant startup ideas. All 3 of them have been funded by Chinese investors. The only question is to what level. The lowest was around 20%, the highest was around 80%. Now, if you believe, as some people in the United States believe, that you send money to the Wuhan Institute of Virology and the Wuhan Institute or any university or any institute there in a state like that, and they're not going to have a section where it's exclusively military work for their own people. It happens in the United States. I certainly hope it happens in India. It definitely happens in the UK. I'm sure it happens in Europe. It's definitely happening in China. And if you assume that it's not happening in China, and you believe that all the money that's been spent is spent entirely on the material that's been given back to you in the form of research, I must confess that you don't seem to know very much about the world you're in today, which is the world of Cold War 2.0. We are in the middle of a war of systems, of an existential war of systems. The Soviet Union tried to ratchet up this into an existential crisis. It never really became an existential crisis, even though a lot of so-called governments that the United States supported were very similar to the Soviet government, bureaucracies, little cliques, elite groups, lording it over everybody else. But still, it was never an existential crisis because those who enjoyed democracy, at least 80% democracy or 90% or even 40% democracy, they understood the virtues of democracy. Look at the people of Taiwan. Look at what happened in Hong Kong. You had 2 million people on the streets. Why? Because they knew that democracy was the best system. So the Soviet Union really, there was no question of the Soviet Union, that systemic thing winning. From the 1960s onwards, let's say. But it's a different matter that, you had a Cold War and the Soviet Union imploded and the United States claimed credit. Today, you got a ceasefire between Israel and Hamas. And of course, naturally, the United States, Joe Biden is claiming credit. The same gentleman who frankly ignored Sisi, who is one of the most important players in the Middle East and who till today has not really called out Erdogan or Pakistan, very frankly. He is basically claiming credit for something which I'm a good friend of the United States. I'd like to say I've been, I used to write articles which are very pro-Biden early in the election campaign. I turned off Trump when I found he had basically succumbed to Erdogan and sold out the Kurds, and he had succumbed to the Taliban and given an instrument of surrender to the Taliban, which is what this agreement with Taliban is all about. So I had tuned off Trump. I'd gone to Biden. I was subject to a tremendous amount of trolling from people who are normally friends of mine. And who told me, "What are you doing? Biden is awful. He's bad for India." My point was, if Biden is an honest guy, I don't think Biden is in any way, dishonest or corrupt, or money is his motivation. He wants to make a mark as president. He wants his country. He comes from a background that is very much, integrated into what the country is. I don't think he's shown any racist threat in a kind of a thread in his psyche at all. So a man like that will understand the kind of war that the United States is facing and will understand India is essential. If the United States doesn't have India, it will lose primacy in the Indo-Pacific. It's then only a matter of time before it loses primacy in the Atlantic. The European powers seem to have accepted that. I mean, to some extent. United States, I'm not entirely sure, judging by, for example, that the United States administration fully understands the need to bring as many countries together into the big tent that they are looking at building. It's not only people who look like you, who think like you, who read like you. It's people who may not look like you, who may not think like you, who may not read like you, and who may argue with you, whether publicly to your face or privately to their families back home. These are also people you need to bring in the tent, because the other side, believe me, is working night and day to bring them into the tent, just as it's working night and day to bring people in all our countries into the tent. That is what we are engaged in today. It's a much more severe struggle. It is again existential. And I can tell you this time around, we are not at a period when we can say the hill has been crossed. We are on the road to, if I may say so, victory. We are far from the road to victory. Then I end by going back to Europe. And, if you look at the conversations in Europe, the diplomatic conversations in Europe, you could, in a sense, have predicted the 1914 war. If you look at the conversations in Germany, you could have predicted Hitler. The conversations in 1920s in Germany, you could have predicted Hitler. Well, you didn't predict the war, you didn't predict Hitler. Frankly, if you look at the conversations that are taking place now, you can predict what is planned for the major democracies, India, the United States among them. You can predict the objective of those making those plans, and you can also predict what is likely to happen if there is a meltdown of systems and a particular kind of system emerges on top. With that, Althea, if you don't mind, I think I've exhausted the patience of your thing. I've crossed my limit. I mean, even for a Malayali, I think this is a lot. Thank you very much.
No, what a wonderful discussion, and amazing, you took from one end to another end. And I'll just make few comments and I'll ask you one question or two questions, because I think your time is also precious. So one of the things is casta is a European word from which the word caste has come. Indian word is varna, which is what exactly you describe, that guna karma is purely based on actions and qualities that you have acquired from nature. And you also very rightly said that the Sanatana Dharma is a horizontal platform. That means it is designed for the entire humanity. And one of the words which comes in Bhagavad Gita is Loka Sangraha. And I captured in my book Yudhishthira as well as Narada, for which both the books you wrote the forward. And actually you have written forward for all my books. I think you don't remember maybe, but you have written for all my books, 7 books. And that's Loka Sangraha, and the title for a king is Lokpal, one who takes care of all the people, and which you correctly said it. And the and you also rightly said that the world is highly appreciative of India's spiritual culture, which is the only spiritual culture which has not exploited anyone. There are systemic problems, but that is due to individuals, not due to the culture itself. Like in everywhere else, the good things get exploited by bad people. Even the American tax system, which is supposed to be very strict, is exploited by bad people also. It's a that is a aberration, not a norm. And
Aditya, if I can just, because you're so brilliant that you leave me far behind. I want to say that I have, I wrote an article an op-ed in the Times of India many years ago, early 90s, something called Hindutva. And my point was that Indian cultural DNA is a fusion of the Vedic, the real Vedic, the Mughal, and the Western. All three strands are in each of us. I mean, whether you see people who say, no, we are completely Vedic. Well, you see their families, they go around in dresses which are from the Mughal period. They love food. I'm a vegetarian, so frankly, a lot of that food is not my favorite food. But they love food from the Mughal period. And all of us speak English. And all of us have learned a tremendous amount of things from interaction with the West. At the same time, a tremendous amount can be learned from the pre-period. But I'd like to say, Aditya, it's very important to understand that we can't say that this was a dark age, this was a light age, that there was any kind of a dark age and a light age. It's all different shades and different colors. Let's be honest with that. So you had, even before the Mughal era, you had, if I may say so, discrimination. I'll give you an example of why one of my theories as to why, for example, Prithviraj Chauhan lost that war again to Mahmud of Ghazni, and why, for example, Alexander beat the Persians. My theory is because only a particular segment of society at that point in time, Prithviraj's time, was allowed to bear arms in India. Everybody in the population should have been given equal opportunity and the right to bear arms, provided he or she met the training standards. In the case, if that had happened, I can tell you, I don't believe that Mahmud of Ghazni would have been successful. Of course, apart from the fact that Prithviraj Chauhan gave him many lives, literally allowed him to go away. And finally, he got a tactic of attacking at night, etc., that took that. But the main problem was only a segment of society was allowed to bear arms. I think the so-called British also kept that thing, the so-called martial races. But frankly, in my opinion, the concept of martial races does not exist. You got brave people and cowardly people in all races. You got brave people and cowardly people inside every segment of the labels that you put society in. So I'd only like to say, Aditya, that look, I don't think there was a dark age and before that everything was shining light. If that happened, I can tell you it's a contradiction in terms, but it does emphasize one point. It does emphasize the importance of security and defense of a civilization. And 2 points, the example of India, 2 points. One, internal security. You have an internal social system that is, in a sense, healthy. And secondly, defense externally. And you build a system that is basically externally able to meet any external threat. In the case of India, you and I have talked this about the United States and India needing to work together. Internally, I'd like to say we should not basically take the loony fringe in the so-called right or left or this or that seriously. Let's take the moderate middle seriously. Let's expand the moderate middle and finally expose the loony fringes on both sides of what they are, loony fringes. The United States also needs to do the same because there's an organized effort from outside to expand that fringe. So it's no longer called Rooney. And I'm sorry to say that in my own case, for example, when I have mentioned about some of these things that I'm telling you today, when I've talked to people in the Lutean zone, they are, of course, very civilized to me. They're very polite to me. They know I know a few politicians reasonably well. I mean, they're not sure the politicians like me or not, but they don't want to take a risk. But behind my back, they say, oh, this guy is a conspiracy theorist. This guy is talking something wild. I mean, that's their, because they don't want to go outside the security zone of their own concepts. And that's a problem we have in India. We have retained the colonial structure. We have retained the colonial mode of administration. And a lot of the thinking of what passes for strategy has been steeped in that particular culture. We need to get into the inclusive culture, what I define as Hindutva. We need to take the best case lessons from our history, all of our history, the victories and defeats, and all of the world, and then bring the best countries together from our point of view and the best case from our point of view to design our methods, our tactics, and those tactics have to be part of a concentrated strategy of bringing this country up, my focus has been making the people of India, nobody in India should go to bed hungry at night. Nobody in India should suffer from healthcare. Nobody in India should have no roof or a horrible kind of a roof which can fall apart at the slightest breeze. Exactly what Joe Biden wants the American people. I mean, it's what we in India want, what everybody wants. And I can tell you, we need to plan on that basis because that security is important. By the way, the lights are off. There's been a power cut. That's all right. But, this is Kerala. And in Kerala, I can tell you, power cuts don't last more than 30 minutes. So I'm very sure this will come back. But I think it's a hint to me that I'm talking too much.
Now, I will ask you. Viewers cannot see him, but I'll still ask him because he's on the line. One of the things which I want to ask you, you said many points, and you gave great strategic inputs and everything, which is very informative. And the points which you mentioned about the different political spectrums and other things. So you have perfected the art of strategic insight, and this is what strategic insight is. Strategic insight doesn't mean that you study some newspapers and you form your opinion by analyzing it. It means that going into the deep depth of why people are thinking like that, what is their nature, and then how they came about creating it. Now, so many people have joined right now, and they have deep respect for India, and they loved your talk. That's why they're all staying back. And the point is that every single philosophy being taught in the West has already been captured in ancient Indian scriptures like Ramayana, Mahabharata, Bhagavad Puran, many places. Like Machiavellian thought is Kanika's instructions to Yudhishthir. Same thing he taught, how to exploit others, which is very much looks similar to Chinese philosophy today. It has very similar. If you have seen my book, in which I have written a whole chapter on Kanik's instruction to Yudhishthir, which is for the same purpose, to understand this is nothing new. Is that if you don't learn from the history repeats itself, like you said just now.
Again, allow me to cut in here again. And I would like to say, yes, it's taught from all three periods of our history, the Vedic, the Mughal, and the Western. We need to integrate all the thinking. And as far as your Sanatana Dharma, I am a Sanatani. When I was in Saudi Arabia, when you apply for a visa for Saudi Arabia, I was invited there to basically inaugurate the Saudi Arabian edition of a Malayalam newspaper. So I went there and I was asked to state my religion. So I said Sanatana Dharma. And frankly, the Saudi embassy was a little perplexed. But finally, I think, they said, all right, this must be some new religion which only you know, but we'll give you the visa. We don't know what is it. Frankly, but look, Dharma. Look at the concept of Dharma. And look at the concept of Tyag. something that you discussed with Lakshmi, and I think you had some very good discussions with Lakshmi. Lakshmi has been doing a tremendous amount of research, mainly by going to the priests of the major temples, talking to them, living with them, having them come and stay with us, and the tyag, for example, sacrifice. Politicians always talk about sacrifice, as though it's intrinsic to ancient Indian culture. One thing I'll tell you, Aditya, we need to use all of our culture, and if you tag it with a religious tag, you've had it, because a large section even in the Hindu community will turn away from it. It has got to be understood this is Indic culture, and whatever religion you believe in, including, I'm happy to say, there are still a few citizens of India who are Jewish. Thank God for that. I'm really, because I think this is one of the most, if I may say so, Parsis and Jews, two of the most talented communities on earth. But I'd like to say that we have to understand very, very clearly that tyag is not there in the roots of Indian culture. Dharma has been meant to mean that you go off into a cave and meditate. Definitely. I mean, you do that if you're a renunciate. So the dharma of meditation and renunciation, tyag essentially means sacrifice, as you discussed with Lakshmi some time ago. Sacrifice of something good for something not so good, which doesn't make sense to most people. It may make sense to a few people, the renunciate, great. But the point is that dharma for the normal human being who's not the renunciate means, as you correctly said, doing good to all.
All.
That doing something for society which is not just beneficial for you, but beneficial for yourself. I want to say, going back to my experience, I became the resident editor of the Times of India in Bangalore. We had a pretty low circulation. I wanted to boost the circulation significantly. I boosted the circulation in Mathrubhumi, the Malayalam paper. I had some problems there because, so long, but whatever. But then I moved to the Times of India. And I said, look, we need clean air, we need clean water, we need, a good transportation. Now, how am I going to work on and support policies that give clean air and transportation and water only to readers of Times of India? Because at that point in time were not very much. They're very large now. And I think to some small extent I had a role in that. You have to basically ensure that your paper stands up for clean air for all.
Yeah.
It stands up for justice for all. It stands up for equality for all. It stands up for human rights for all. It stands up for clean environment for all. And if you do that, your readers also benefit. And more readers come onto your bandwagon. Exactly. But if you say, I'm only going to worry about my readers, I mean, that happened to some extent, the Mathrubhumi. We were called the coconut press. And the Manorama, our main competitor, was called the rubber press, because a lot of our readers had coconut farms. And a lot of the Manorama readers had rubber plantations. So whenever the price of rubber fell, it was front page news in Manorama. It was buried in some of the inside pages of Mathrubhumi. When the prices of coconut fell, front page news in Mathrubhumi and buried inside. Well, you can have instances like that. I'm not saying that. But overall, Aditya, we are in this together. Let's understand that. Our Sanatana Dharma teaches us that. And one day you should explain the concept of Dharma more close, to all our friends who are listening in. Dharma means doing good to all. It doesn't mean going into a cave. That's absolutely legitimate if you're a renunciate. If you're not a renunciate, that dharma doesn't apply to you. The dharma of a householder is to look after his household, look after the society, because these are concentric rings that move bigger and bigger and bigger. And every one of these rings has got to be successful. And the more rings you make successful, the greater is your contribution to dharma.
No, very, very clearly, like Arjun wanted to take sannyas, but Krishna asked him to fight a war for the purpose of Lokasangra, for the benefit of entire humanity. Otherwise, so it's a very simple concept. You said very important thing also, that not the race part, and it's very, you put it so well, that the concept of martial race is a completely non-existent thing. Like it's just a figment of imagination, because there are some people who can hurt themselves more with a weapon than others. It's an art to hold a weapon too.
Either you're looking at one of them.
The first thing which is told when you I have a fire safety certificate. I'm a trainer for holding arms, because I carry a lot of those kind of I have toys, those kind of toys. But the first thing we are taught is how to hold it and how not to hurt yourself first, before others. So you're absolutely right, it is purposely created to scare somebody else. But the like varna exists in every society. Within the same mother and father, you can have four varna children. One is into business, one is into teaching, one is a warrior, and another is a doing a job. Both, all four exist together. Now the last thing I'll ask you, and then you can clarify it. One of you have a very deep strategic insight into China, into India's neighborhood, and most importantly, America. Sometimes Americans don't understand America more than someone looking it from outside. If you are in a well, you cannot understand how big is the well because you're inside it. But if you're outside it, you can understand well. So, as far as the Indian strategic insight, you have spoken about it. That there are some people, they are still with a colonial mindset. I call it the colonial hangover. There's one video coming on that shortly. But for the Americans also, now they are suffering from a hangover. There were golden periods in the modern history of USA, but again, there were bad decisions and their foreign policies tipped here and there. So how do you, sitting from outside, look at America and have such an accurate observation of American strategic affairs? What is your process of doing that?
Aditya, let's come to India first, my country. And, I talked to you about Prithviraj Chauhan and his society, where only a section were allowed to fight. And in the case of, I didn't talk about Alexander and the Persian troops were slaves. Alexander's Greeks were free men. There's a difference between free men and slaves. The motivation, the morale, and is different. So in the case of India, one problem we have is that in a colonial administration, the administration believes it is a monopoly on wisdom. I mean, it may consult a few people, and those few people will be friends of somebody in the colonial administration. So you consult the same friends over and over again for whatever. But the reality is, if you consult the whole of society or civil society, and if you utilize civil society, well, you can frame a lot better policy than if you just confine yourself to a segment of society, mainly, which is the civil service. And civil service is a great idea. Every country needs it. But the reality of the situation is that civil service needs to be, in a sense, fertilized with civil society. You have that in the United States. You have that in China, for heaven's sake. In China, people come in from academies and they go back. In the United States, that happens all the time. In India, it's never happens. Now, recently, the Prime Minister has been trying to introduce some changes, getting in some people. But the people he has brought in, they have short-term tenures. And essentially they're treated as being different. They're not treated the same. They're treated as, in a sense, token members of the elite services. They're not tokens. Many of them have got, for example, Latin America or Africa. Some of the people working in Indian companies, they have finished off Chinese competition in large parts of Africa. Have they ever been used to find out anything about China? No. Some of us have. Has the government? I don't believe it. If the government has, they have kept it a secret from me, the guys whom I talk to. South America. There are people who know South America very well. There are people who know so many different countries very well. In civil society, they may not all be professors. And I can tell you that professors have the belief that have a separate problem, like the civil service. We also believe we know everything. We also believe that academics is everything. You sit in a classroom, you get your degree, you get this thing, you get that, you work, you start lecturing, and after, the more you do, the more expert you are. Sometimes, frankly, the more you do of a certain group, the less expert you become because conditions change. So I'd like to say, Aditya, that it's very important in the United States that you have a society which is resilient enough to meet the challenge of the Sino-Russian alliance and the Wahhabis. I mean, now, for example, in the case of the United States, there are diplomats from a certain country that I'm not going to name because people assume that, we don't like that country. I have nothing against that country. I mean, I used to write regularly for a newspaper in that country, and they're wonderful people. But I don't like the military of that country. And the military of that country, unfortunately, dominates the politics of that country. So the reality of the situation is that these, the kind of messaging that they're doing in one way or the other, the kind of tactics that is being adopted by, mainly by China, I would say. Pakistan is, in the case of India, for example, assume that the virus variant that is there has been caused by an external factor. I mean, one vector would be there's a very big network here which can carry it. And that network can come in from Pakistan, it can come in from Myanmar, it can come in from anywhere, and they can carry it because it's very interesting that this variant first hit Delhi, then went on to Bangalore, and then went on to Mumbai. Now, Delhi is the capital of India, Bangalore is the IT capital of India, and Mumbai is the commercial capital of India. And frankly, it has hit a lot of places in between also. It doesn't seem to have hit. Amritsar, for example, has been very, very badly affected by this variant. But somehow this variant doesn't seem to have managed to find the bus to go to Lahore. This variant doesn't seem to have found the bus to go from Meerut to Kathmandu. This variant doesn't seem to have found the bus to travel, not the bus, the boat to travel from Chennai to Colombo or Kolkata to Dhaka. I'm not saying that they're all suffering. Definitely, they've all got this thing. If it's this particular variant, well, the spread is not as much as it is here. Here we've been having a major crisis, and I think I've explained in great length why the crisis came. We kind of declared victory too soon, as the Americans did in a different form of warfare in a certain country called Iraq. But secondly, we didn't pay attention to therapeutics the way we should have. And thirdly, we didn't develop companies that could have developed vaccines. We just 2 or 3 companies that produce vaccines in the early 20, the same companies were producing vaccines in early 2021. The Prime Minister finally acted about 2 months ago, changed a lot of these things. If that action had come 1 year ago, we would not have been in this not very pleasant place that we are in, but the action has come. And I'm, thank God for that. The virus is also running its course. But I'd like to say, you have to take account of the hypothesis, the possibility that this is bio warfare. And you have to prepare defenses against that. India can be the vaccine capital of the world. George W. Bush recognized that. After turning to all the American pharma companies, he realized that he would go bankrupt if he had only American pharma. He turned to India. And because of because of therapeutics from India, no vaccine. Vaccines against AIDS were useless because they kept on mutating. AIDS virus is very similar to the COVID-19 virus, if I may say so, SARS-2 virus. It keeps mutating a lot, and mutants are there. Of course, what is surprising is, from what I understand from scientific friends, I have zero knowledge of science, all the mutants seem to have a very common genomic root. I don't know if that's true or not, but if it's true, it should at least lead to some, flags being raised. Obviously, there were no flags raised in the Trump administration when all that money under Donald Trump was flowing all the way to Wuhan lab and to so many other institutions in China. There were no flags at all. Donald Trump mobilized a lot of television time, but he didn't seem to mobilize too much of time on basically plugging the leaks if there were leaks in his strategy. But I'd like to say, Aditya, let's be serious. We are at war. And as far as the United States is concerned, United States and India, other countries, the Quad countries, for example, United States, India, Japan, Australia, we can clobber the other combination any day, provided our internal house is in order. We have enough coordinated defenses against an external threat in which each country uses the resources that each country has. In the case of India, for example, we have some of the best fighting manpower in the world. One reason why the Chinese suffered a lot of casualties at Galwan, which they're not revealing, of course, to the world, is because their soldiers come from single-child families and they've never been at war. They may have gone to arcades. They may have gone for these, war rehearsals. Our soldiers have been in combat for decades and decades and decades. They know what war is. They have been trained and steeped in that. And they don't have there are certain militaries, again, I will not name them, democratic militaries. If you look at the priorities, priority 1 to 9, ensuring your own soldiers don't get hurt. Doesn't matter who gets hurt, doesn't matter if the enemy is destroyed or not, or the enemy revives, doesn't matter if there's collateral damage, your own soldiers should not be hurt. That's 1 to 9. Number 10 is victory or stalemate or whatever you're aiming at. In the case of India, I would like to say, we have some of the best fighting people in the world. If they have got a certain amount of logistical help, let's say, a certain amount of help from within. Now, Prime Minister Modi has again done something important. He has opened the defense sector to the private sector. He did this, in fact, more than a year ago. He has been doing, Modi 2.0 has been quite good in a lot of, if I may say so, in a lot of ways. And I'd like to say, with all the criticism I'm levying against this government, I'm criticizing it as somebody who wants this government to succeed. And tomorrow, if somebody else becomes the prime minister, I'd want that man to succeed because he's running my country. And I'll point out what he's doing right and what he's doing wrong. I mean, Mr. Vajpayee was a BJP prime minister. I don't think there were very many people. You Google my name and Vajpayee's, and you'll find some very critical articles about Vajpayee. So, I'd only like to say, Aditya, that look, we are at war. I'm not entirely sure Joe Biden or his team understand the nature of that particular war. If they did, they'd look more closely than Donald Trump and the Republican Party and the right wing. In India, the same thing. States that are BJP go and take action against social media people who operate from the opposition space. Opposition space does the same thing against people from the BJP. Look, this is absolutely not correct. Both have to come together, and you have to identify the common threat. You have to show the common threat to the entire people so that the moderate middle becomes the overwhelmingly big middle. And in India, fortunately, till today, overwhelmingly, Christians, Muslims, Buddhists, Hindus, we are all moderate. Muslims are moderate. Christians are moderate. Hindus are moderate. Sikhs are moderate. And I want to end this little tirade by talking about Punjab. And I used to go to the Punjab in the 1980s. And when this horrible, sponsored so-called Khalistan war was going on there, it was fed from outside. And when I realized that Pakistan is never going to win this war, when my wife and I went to a village, and I frankly, it's a bit difficult for me to talk about it now, and I think there's maybe 3 or 4 times I have talked about it in public. So okay, and 2 or 3 vehicles came forward. I don't remember what kind of vehicles they were. I think they were jeeps. I think whatever they were, I don't remember anything much about them because everything was in slow motion after that. And you had about 7 or 8 guys got out of that vehicle with arms, etc., and all in slow motion. they asked all the Hindus, men, to stand to one side. I was wearing a cross and I was having a Bible with me, not because I'm a Christian. It's a great religion, and I respect it enormously. But no, I don't follow that faith. But because I was warned that, look, if this does happen to you, that you get this kind of thing, there's a 1 in 20 chance that you may be spared if you're seen as something other than a Hindu. If you're seen, as being a Hindu, 100% you'll be knocked out. So at least you've got a 20% chance. Fortunately, the person who said that to me, my wife was listening to him as well. This was quite some time ago. Again, about a year before this happened. She jumped, pushed me back from joining the rest of the line, took the Bible out of my pocket, a small little Bible out of my pocket, grabbed the necklace not the necklace, if I may say so, the cross. It was like a necklace. I wore it as a necklace from my chest, and shouted to them, "Christian, Christian!" And then one of the guys, fortunately, that 20% happened. He waved, get back," and she pushed me back. Well, I only want to say, for some time she didn't allow me to forget it. But I'm only wanting to say, Aditya, you know what happened? These guys left. After about 20, 30 minutes, something, they shouted Khalistan slogans, and everybody else had to shout those slogans. Men, women of all different faiths, you don't shout the slogan, well, you join the Hindu men who were killed. After that, they left. About 30, 40 minutes after they left, there was crying, there was sobbing. They had put a Khalistan flag on some, I think, some flagpole or something, or some kind of a pole in the village, or a stick or something in the village. They had put a Khalistan flag. As soon as it was clear that they had left, the Sikhs, Sikhs, who were supposed to be fighting for Khalistan, the Sikhs in that village, who, frankly, the women were embracing the Hindu women who had lost their husbands. The men were crying, they were weeping. I mean, I was in shock, frankly. I was neither embracing anyone, nor was I weeping. I was in complete shock at what I'd seen. They just pulled that flag down. They just almost tore it down. And I realized that these people are never, ever going to, fall for this horrible, what they've been told, that you don't belong to India. Never. And I want to again end by further codicil to my ending. We had a chap called KPS Gill. He was not, if I may say so, the most polite of people. He had his peccadillos, let's put it that way. But he was very, very good at law and order, and very, very good at counterterrorism. And he was a Sardar, a Sikh. Wisely, the government chose him to be the Director General of Police in the Punjab. He went to Punjab. There were Julia Ribeiro, there were other people. All of them had their bodyguards who were not one Sikh was in their bodyguard. Not one Sikh. You can't take a chance after all. And this was, I think, around the same, I think it was after our experience in the village, because Gill very quickly put things right. KPS Gill, the first decision he took was, everybody in my personal bodyguard is going to be a Sikh. I'm a Sikh. I'm a proud Sikh. And what the hell are you saying that I can't have Sikhs in my bodyguard? Some agencies told him, sir, don't have Sikhs. Sorry, only Sikhs, Sikh police officers. And they're going to be chosen by superintendents of police, Sikh superintendents of police in the districts, and they're going to choose them. I'm not going to meet any of them. They're going to choose them, and they're going to guard me. Well, believe me, they guarded extremely well as anybody else guarded Ribeiro or anybody else. But that's the point about India. That's the point. We are a great country. The Muslim population of India is so overwhelmingly moderate. And the Hindu population, overwhelmingly moderate, which is why I said that some lunatic who killed a person because he had supposed to have eaten buffalo meat, that person is probably a mental case, but in any case should have been prosecuted under terrorism laws, and his lawyer should have proven that he's a mental case, because it's an act of terrorism. To kill somebody for a diet or dress or lifestyle, no matter what your religion, is an act of terrorism. And fortunately, I would like to say, but for a handful of crazy people like that, the others are not in that. The others, in the United States, you have some pretty crazy people who believe in race, for example, race theory, the kind of what's called Rassenkunde in Deutschland, in Germany, you know. But I mean, it's insanity. It's not just irrational. It's insanity. It's psychosis. And if you have that kind of theory in India, it's again, and if you have a theory based on religion, not even on race, it's even more bigger insanity. So I would like to say that these insane fringes, whether it's the Muslim fringe, the Hindu fringe, the Christian fringe, or if I may say so, I mean, I love the Jewish community. They're wonderful people. They really were the one people who stood, who basically were polite to me, who some of them invited me to their homes. Some of them are still friends of mine. Even after all these years, they now invite me to go to Israel or to New York or wherever they are. They're good friends of mine. They're wonderful people. But there are some crazy Jews also. And you have to understand that these people have to be identified as crazies. And you can't allow social media or the media to describe them as anything other than crazies. Because remember, one of the main tactics of weakening our societies is to expand the fringe at the expense of the moderate middle. I'm sorry, I have some other programs at 8:30 and I have to take leave, but it's been a great privilege to talk to you and to other friends. God bless all of you, and namaskar. Namaskar, by the way, means, it means nama astude. It basically is not a religious thing. Alabama seems to have called it Hindu and religious and banned it. If so, the people in Alabama need to understand it means nama astude, which means I bow to the divinity in you. If the Alabamans have any doubt that every human being has got the divinity, the presence of God inside, and we are all children of God, all of us are children of the same Almighty, well, I'd like to say they should stop going to church altogether, because what they're following is definitely not Christianity. Thank you very much.
Dr. Nalapat, you shared so many things, and it's like you're an institution for me. So it's just not possible to wrap it up in one conversation. I would like to invite you again. And there are many, many points come to my mind, and I would like to make it a shorter conversations on many topics like nationalism versus patriotism and the academic violence against a few. Academic violence, I'll say, when people write without thinking the effects of those words on the psyche of people for a long time to come, destroy their identity. I would like to speak on that a little bit, because that also comes into the warfare nowadays, information warfare, narrative warfare. And I'd like to touch base on that maybe in some other discussion. But today it was Sattology channel is very, very grateful to you for coming on the show, because I respect you a lot and your wisdom, and plus your connection to the roots, because only person who is connected to the roots and is clear about their identity can make a difference to other people's life also. Just like it is said that, in Hindi, they say thali ka bengan. Wherever it goes and flows in that direction, that's not the way it should function. As a human being, we should stand for who we are, and we should be actually building on our own identity wherever you belong to. And that gives you because we are made unique in this world to make our own contribution, and everyone has a right to contribute also. They have an equal right to opportunity, but an equal right to contribute also. And that's what is needed to make all of us into a very productive part of the human society. And especially I like the point that it is a duty of the strong to protect the weak, and that's varnashram. And whosoever is strong, it doesn't matter. It is the duty of them to protect the weak. And that's why Sanatana Dharma is the best institution for protecting human rights across the world, because that's a culture. that if you are strong, you have to protect the weak. Loka Sangraha. And with that, I'll end here. And Dr. Nalapat, thank you so much again for coming on
Thank
the
you.
show.
Thank you. Thank you.